Well, can I say what a pleasure it is to come to your conference? I can tell you that I've been a church warden and a parish warden in my time, parish warden of some 4 churches in London. During that time, I had to ensure that between the churches, and we're talking about nearly 2 decades ago, we had to raise £5,000 a week just to cover our costs. I had an interregnum of 15 months. Oh, I know what it's like. I still hold the record in that diocese for the most number of faculty applications during an interregnum. It seemed to me to be the very best way of ensuring that the congregation didn't dwell on the fact that they hadn't got a vicar. We had one particular rule which I suspect you would all wish for, which is you could not remain as church warden for more than 4 years. So you could give your all during that 4 years and know that that was it. Sometimes you have to do it for a second time, but I changed church before they could do that. So in short, you have my understanding, sympathy, and above all, admiration for the work that you do and undertake on behalf of your parish and community. Now, Archdeacon Richard has set me a load of topics to cover, which means that the title of the address has gone completely out of the window. I may have 2 seconds at the end to mention the things that I was quite interested in doing. So, first of all, question 1 was, who am I and what is my role? I think it's worth just telling you a little about my day job. I am a senior circuit judge sitting at the Old Bailey in London. I try a diet of murder and terrorism. Murder trials tend to be multi-handed trials, several defendants, all who come from one estate or one postcode, and they form a gang who like to go out and kill members of another gang. This was usually through knife crime, but more and more is now with gun crime, as guns have come to the capital in a big way. The defendants fall into 2 parts in the gang. They're the olders, as they're called, and the youngers. If I tell you the olders are 18 to 22, and the youngers are therefore 14, up to about 18, you can imagine some of the problems we have in trying to get the work done with very, very young, children they are, who have gone out and committed the most horrendous offences. Well, now, what one might wonder is, how on earth does that give me any qualification to be Chancellor? I suppose a lifetime in the Church of England. I think having been a church warden is an enormous advantage. And at least as Bishop Stephen recognised, who appointed me, that I have had over 45 years of experience of dealing with the public. And at the end of the day, the church is nothing without its people, however essential it may be to preserve and develop its buildings. So what is the role of the Chancellor? Chancellors were first appointed in 1539 by Henry VIII. You can imagine why he did that after he'd broken from Rome. And initially it was to provide him with an inventory of all the churches, before no doubt he thought of the good idea of nicking most of their chapels and so forth. The Chancellor, and there is one for each diocese within the Church of England and Church of Wales, became the judge of the consistory court. The consistory court being the ecclesiastical court of the diocese. Interestingly, although it has jurisdiction over all the parish churches in the diocese, does not have any jurisdiction over the cathedral, which is dealt with by a separate body. So when you say, well, the cathedral's got chairs like that, why can't we? Well, until relatively recently, we dealt with offences committed by priests, known as the naughty priest jurisdiction. Sadly, we have lost that to the secular courts, and any issues as to disciplinary matters go to the clergy disciplinary tribunal. So our role is now largely to act as an in-house planning authority, deciding on all but the most trivial and like-for-like changes in the building, which can be left to be sanctioned if it's needed at all by the archdeacons. In making my decision, I followed laws and rules which have been approved by the General Synod for use in the ecclesiastical jurisdiction, and then laid before Parliament, because this is an established church, and therefore it is through Parliament that we get our authority. As with the civil courts, we rely on precedents. The court above the diocesan consistory court is the Court of Arches, which is presided over by the Dean of Arches, who is the senior ecclesiastical judge, and who sits normally with two chancellors to decide appeals from the consistory courts of each of the chancellors. It sits rarely, you'll be pleased to hear, but we are bound by the decisions of that court. We also are kept up to date with what chancellors in other dioceses have done. We're not bound by that or what any other chancellor has done, but it's always interesting to see how they tackle problems. Next question I was posed was, why is the faculty jurisdiction better than listed building consent? Well, it is. In short, and now the explanation. In short, we have a far wider discretion to permit alterations to be made to buildings than our secular equivalent. Following decision of the Court of Arches, now of some age, which is in a case called In Re St Alkmund Duffield. I never knew there was a St Alkmund until I read the case. We decide whether to allow alterations to be made on the following principles, which we are bound to follow. Firstly, would the proposals, if implemented, result in harm to the significance of the church as a building of special architectural or historical interest? If the answer to that question is no, then the ordinary presumption in faculty proceedings, and get these words, in favour of things as they stand, is applicable and can be rebutted more or less readily depending on the particular nature of the proposals. But if the answer is yes, there will be harm, the proposals, if implemented, would result in harm to the significance of the church as a building of special architectural or historic interest, which is the position in the great majority of applications within this diocese, I then have to ask myself a series of further questions. Firstly, how serious would the harm be? Secondly, how clear and convincing justification for carrying out the proposals? Thirdly, bearing in mind that there is a strong presumption against proposals which will adversely affect the special character of a listed building, will any resulting public benefit outweigh the harm? And here is where we have the edge on the secular system, because in deciding that, we can include matters such as liturgical freedom, pastoral well-being, opportunities for mission, and putting the church to viable uses that are consistent with its role as a place of worship and mission. I should tell you, in my interview, Bishop Stephen said, would you mind if a church tied up with the police and was also a police station? He was surprised when I said, yes, undoubtedly I would be against it. The church is there to help people who are in trouble, not to be seen as a building where you get arrested and imprisoned. But anyway, so there's an example of how you've got to be a little bit careful. So what, yes, that still sort of exists. But in considering and answering that question of whether it outweighs the harm, the more serious the harm, the greater will be the level of benefit needed before proposals should be permitted. This will particularly be the case if the harm is to a building which is a grade 1 or grade 2 star building. And I suspect you all know what the grading of your buildings are, and you will know just how many of them exist within this diocese. And if it is within grade 1 or grade 2 star, serious harm should only exceptionally be allowed. That is what I have to follow. Now, planning authorities do not have the same latitude to take into account those factors which I've just gone through. And anyone who is, has the benefit, in inverted commas, of living in a house that is either grade 1 or grade 2 star will know the difficulties they encounter, even if they want to put a pipe through a wall in order to create a lavatory, let alone anything else. So, were you subject to the secular rules, it is likely that many applications to change the interior of churches would fail. And it's encouraging that a number of Cambridge colleges, and I think Archdeacon Annex is to be praised for this, who fall outside of the jurisdiction of the Chancellor, have voluntarily opted into the faculty system because they see the benefits over the secular system. Well, now, an example of this happened relatively recently when I was asked to deal with an application by King's College to put solar panels on its roof, King's College having come into the faculty jurisdiction. Of course, because it was work on the outside of a building, they also needed planning permission from Cambridge Council. I eventually got to hear that the council wanted to know my opinion before they gave their decision. Well, this allowed me to have a hasty and last-minute visit to the chapel, and I was allowed up on the roof itself and walked up and then along the apex at the top, the most fantastic experience, I promise you, if a little hair-raising from time to time. And then it gave me about a week to write a fairly lengthy judgment, which I'm pleased to say has been adopted when dealing with solar panels by other dioceses. But I got the decision out, I think it was about 9:55 on the Monday morning. I'm looking at my registrar's assistant on that one. But, and they then met in the afternoon, and in the knowledge that I'd said, yes, go ahead, they also concluded that the scheme could go ahead. But it's quite interesting that they were interested in what the church was saying about it before they made their decision. Well, now, what latitude, whatever latitude I may have, there are certain things I've got to have in mind. Ely Diocese, as I've already said, has a wealth of grade 1 and grade 2 star buildings of outstanding historic interest, outstanding beauty, both outside and inside. And I have to ensure that they remain for future generations to be able to enjoy. And just because something is out of fashion now, it does not mean that it will not be appreciated by future generations. I have to look at the long term, not the short term. By way of an example, there is hardly a church in the diocese which was not altered, sometimes very significantly, by the Victorians. Well, one wonders what would have been the position if there was a Georgian society in 1837. And one can imagine the outrage there would have been expressed by the Georgian society of what the Victorians wished to do. And there would have been an endless queue of parties opponent who would want to challenge what the Victorians did. And Victoriana is out of fashion, there's no doubt about it. But at its best, and there are some fantastic examples, it has to be protected for future generations to see. Whilst most Victorian pews are poorly constructed of pitch pine, largely because the churches had run out of money and all the fantastic stuff they were made to do to the church itself, nothing was left when it came to the pews. There are a handful of examples within the diocese of really outstanding woodwork within pews, which have to be looked after and kept. Next question, how do you balance harm to the historic building against the missional needs of the church and the community needs of the building? Well, I've already explained the principles, but I can tell you that I give them a strong priority, as does every Chancellor. Although this is the only, I think, established church in Europe, I think it is the only church in Europe that doesn't get funding from local or national government. You have to stump up the money. And unless you can make your buildings viable and in a condition where they can at least help to pay for themselves, we're going to end up with a lot of very glamorous ruins in Ely Diocese and no working churches. So one has got to think of that and give it real emphasis when I'm coming to a decision. But there are some buildings of such importance that they cannot be ripped apart in the name of missional needs. If it's any comfort to those thinking of applying for a faculty or in the process of doing so, to carry out major alterations, although I have the duties that I've already outlined, the number of times that I've refused a faculty can be counted on less than the fingers of one hand over that period of about 14 years. More often I ask for schemes to be reconsidered, sometimes the DAC do the same, and reduced to preserve the overall integrity of the building. Sometimes that pleases no one, but it's, as I say, it's part of my duty to preserve the buildings. Something that is voiced occasionally is that I am but a rubber stamp applied to the advice given to me by the Diocesan Advisory Committee. That is simply untrue. Whilst the DAC has an untold wealth of experience amongst its members in every aspect of church alterations, from line rendering to pews to organs to bells to clocks to churchyards to wood infestation to goodness knows what else, and I only have a superficial understanding of any of those areas, I am bound to rely on the expertise just as I would coming to a decision in the Crown Court at the Old Bailey. But I'm equally aware of and rely on the expertise of the architects appointed by the churches and the local knowledge provided by the petitioners. I do not ignore it. This I weigh up before making my decision. And you should not be concerned about making an application even where you have not got the agreement of the DAC to your plans. I will weigh up the arguments and reach a decision, whatever that decision may be. Next, and this of course is only something that Archdeacon Richard has a concern about and none of you else would do, and that is why does it take so long to get permission to do something? Well, I can see from the paperwork that there are often months of protracted correspondence between the petitioners, the DAC and the registry. And there may be a number of reasons for that, and they include, firstly, the complex nature of a scheme, which may involve many different specialties. Or it may be because the petitioners did not involve the DAC at an early enough stage. The DAC is a resource for you all to use, and I know that they will always do their best to give practical advice and guidance as to what may or may not be possible. Take them on board at the very start of your adventure, and it may save you not only time, but as importantly, money. Well, I'll leave Susan to talk about delays at the registry, but that is often, as I can see, either because you did not consult the registry at an early enough stage, again, get hold of them right at the start, and they'll help you. Or there is a lack of response from outside bodies. We have been dealing with that, or the registry has been dealing with that quite effectively. And sometimes the petitioners themselves fail to provide the information which the registry has asked for, and have good grounds to ask for it. And then they have to pass it, whatever you say, to someone else for their comments, and then it comes back. That's what fairness is all about. That's what any court system is about. It takes time. But I wonder whether it would be any faster than dealing with a local planning authority. My own limited experience is it wouldn't be. When the application is ready, it is sent to me by email. Sometimes I ask for further information, and that causes delay. But if there is no need for that, I aim to turn around any application within a maximum of a week, unless I'm allowed away on holiday from time to time, when it may take a little longer. So usually, Susan gets the applications to me on a Thursday or Friday, and I will have responded on the Monday, by the Monday. If it is complex, it will take longer. I've got to think about it. These are not easy decisions. And it may include a decision on my part to come and have a site visit That is not to hold a consistory court at your church, but simply to come and look. Because however good the photographs are, seeing, as I think a chap called Thomas was told, is believing. So if there is delay, there's good reason for it, and it is the exception to the rule. Next question, what do you look for in a statement of need? And may I say that the quality of most statements of significance and statements of need are extremely high, and I'm very grateful for them. The most important elements are a clear statement of what you're wanting to do, and then a strong justification for doing so, supported by evidence. That's facts and figures with which you can make your arguments. Sometimes the statement of significance is long on the history of the building, and the statement of needs is short on persuasion. The history is important, and to me, absolutely fascinating, but I do need to know why the alteration causing serious harm, which it usually does, to its special architectural or historical interest, should exceptionally be allowed. And rather like a barrister appearing before me in court, you have got to be advocates for your cause in writing. Next question. Just before passing on, I mentioned photographs. They really are useful. Don't get in a professional photographer. You've got phones. You can take photographs. The more the merrier, as far as I'm concerned. Next question. What happens if a church does something without faculty permission? Well, a failure to get permission first is akin to a contempt of court and punishable by a fine against the minister and the PCC, and may require the work to be reversed at the expense of the church. I think I might also have the power to send you to prison, but I don't think that's been done for some time. Where it is inadvertent and an apology is forthcoming, it just won't happen that I would impose any penalty. Where it's deliberate, then the position would be different. Sometimes an historic failure by a previous incumbent or a differently constituted PCC is unearthed by those there at the present time. And the sooner that that is rectified through an application for a faculty, the better. And the present incumbent and PCC will not be held to blame, but thanked for putting it right. I've had a number of recent applications where I think perhaps a PCC, or it may have been a vicar, decided that he could give, or she could give, permission as to who was going to be buried where without faculties. And a subsequent incumbent realised this didn't quite work, and that faculties were required, and it was all put right. And that's fantastic. So, if you unearth something, let's just get it put right. Next, why do churchyard regulations exist? Well, for the same reasons the faculty jurisdiction applies to the church buildings themselves, but so as to allow the minister to grant applications for burials which conform with the regulations, rather than requiring a faculty application for every headstone. So it's a way of actually widening the ability of the church to look after its own affairs. The churchyard is an integral part of the place of worship. The churchyard needs to be protected because it is the setting for a beautiful building erected to the glory of God. They exist because families have entrusted their loved ones to the church to rest there until the day of judgment in peace and quietude. Further, the churchyard is a haven of peace and tranquility, or it should be, for the use of the whole community. And it is as much a part of my duty to protect the churchyards, a haven of peace and tranquility, or it should be, for the use of the whole community. And it is as much a part of my duty to protect the churchyards as it is to protect the church buildings for generations to come. It's the long view, again, not the short view. In 2021, when I was last before you at such a meeting, I showed photos of various churchyards to emphasise this point, and that where a churchyard has memorials made only of stone which complements the church building, and where there are no black or other memorials out of keeping with the area, it does make for a place of beauty and peace. The churchyard regulations do allow for some flexibility in stone, types of memorial, and the wording to be used. And other memorials outside of the regulations may be granted by faculty in the ordinary way, but there are limits. The Archdeacon posed the question, given the modern need to express grief, why is the range of permitted memorials quite narrow? Well, my answer is that the Church is not just allowing a family to express their individual grief, but ensuring that the churchyard overall is a place where everyone is able to express grief and feel comfortable within the churchyard. I gave some examples in 2021 of memorials which appeared in churchyards without permission, such as the can of Stella Artois embedded in a grave, a bottle of beer embedded in another, a cigar in a metal case, playing cards memorialised in stone, a football in stone included in the gravestone itself. A keen motorcyclist had a crash helmet cemented into the headstone, and so it goes on. You can also find a headstone with a Guinness pelican, as used in advertising on television, together with a nicely coloured drawing of a motorcycle on the headstone and a model of the motorcycle at the bottom. Well, there we are. I've said more than once that there may be good reasons for having local churchyard rules for specific churches, particularly those who serve the travelling community, where there could be greater flexibility in what's permitted. It may be possible to do so in an area slightly more remote from the church and which will not have an effect on the church's surroundings themselves. I've yet to receive such an application. I again repeat, it's there and possible. It's of interest to me that I've granted a number of applications recently to PCCs in respect of areas set aside for the interment of ashes. All these applications, and I've granted them all, have been to narrow the effect of the churchyard regulations in terms of the size and type of stone to create conformity. They haven't been to expand them. So perhaps the churchyard regulations aren't very far off what they should be. I should say that there have been great efforts over the last 2 years to try and get more conformity between the dioceses, although there was pretty little between them in any event. And there will be a further change to our churchyard regulations within the next year, simply to standardise the form, but they won't change very much the contents. Well, whilst on churchyards, may I mention 2 things. Please ensure that reserved spaces for burials, including of ashes, are properly marked on the ground, now requiring the use of a metal stake, not wooden stakes that tended to fly out as soon as the motormower went anywhere near them. And the record is meticulously entered in the churchyard register. There have been quite a number of occasions recently where exhumations and reburials have been necessary to put right a failure, it is a failure I'm afraid, by the church to record things properly. This is hugely upsetting for the families of the bereaved, and indeed for the ministers and the PCC who have to deal with it. And it involves and leads to additional costs which are sometimes borne by the parish if it's their fault. Mistakes shouldn't happen. Next, the historic reuse of churchyards for further burials seems to have fallen into desuetude since Victorian times. Few churches have the luxury of being able to purchase more land for burials adjacent to their present churchyards, and whether that's in any event a good use of land, which is a resource in itself, is a matter that you should be considering. I'm delighted, I think it was last week, to have granted a faculty for a church to reuse its churchyard for new burials, where there have been burials in the past. Please can you consider whether there are areas in your churchyard, and it doesn't have to be the whole thing, it can just be a part of it, where you could reuse the land. The pressure on spaces, which leads to more and more applications to reserve a space in the churchyard, would, I'm sure, fall off if there was more space available. I have great problems with the jurisdiction in relation to reserving spaces, because with my communist hat on, I think it's quite unfair that those who can afford to make the applications can get their place and those who can't. Right, I take off my communist hat, my ordinary one, but I do think you could all do something to resolve this position if you reused your land. One further thing, and I know I'm slightly overrunning, but please forgive me. Where something happens in a church which needs to be put right immediately, it is possible to get a faculty, and that can be done within 24 or 48 hours. I often get overnight papers sent by Susan. I will deal with them at the latest by lunchtime. It's done. It's an interim faculty. You can get on with what you need to do, and then you catch up with the faculty process thereafter within a space of, I can't remember what it is, 56 days, is it? We normally get, yeah. So, you can get on with it. It's obviously relevant where, for instance, a roof suddenly collapses in the church, or, God forbid, there's a fire, or there's a serious theft, or indeed if a grave is to fall down and you needed to do something about it. It can be done very fast. I wonder whether I should use that dreadful phrase that we have to listen to every time we get on the train: see it, say it, sort it. But I'm not going to use that phrase because it's so abominable. It has issues in terms of language anyway. On the other hand, that's the proper use of interim faculties. On the other hand, there have been some examples where the process is being used because the PCC has been caught on the hop. Something suddenly has arisen which they should have foreseen. And if only they had, it could have all gone through in the ordinary way. We will still deal with it. We won't stand in your way, but can you just think of using it for the purpose it was intended and not just because, whoops, we should have done that. It would make, it makes further cross for you and of course for the registry. Don't use it, as I say, as a safety net for disorganisation, but to really use it when you need it. It's really a useful jurisdiction. So may I end as I started by thanking you for the often laborious work that you do, whether it is drafting faculties, sweeping floors, unblocking drains, making pots of tea for everybody, dusting the rafters from a rickety cherry picker, weeding, dealing with the endless moans from parishioners who should know better, and occasionally being able to do something fantastic for your church, for your community, and to the glory of God. Thank you.